Welcome, welcome. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our April event, DEI as a Global Conversation. My name is Lisa. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the community manager at Cultivate, where I support the Cultivators community, which is our private Slack community, where trailblazers and corporate change makers gather to connect, to share ideas, and to mobilize for change. If you want to check us out, if you're not familiar with our community, I'm going to drop our link in chat where you can read more and apply if you would like to do that. Let me introduce you to our speakers today. So I want to start with Jephtah Abu. Jeff is a community manager based in Lagos, Nigeria. He advocates for DEI in the community management space with a focus on more global opportunities for community managers living in Nigeria. In his spare time, he volunteers for several nonprofit organizations as a program director, and he published his first book last year. I also have to mention he recently unveiled a community-focused ebook that is fabulous called The Builder's Guide. And one fun fact about Jeff is that this entire conversation came out of a talk I had with him a few months ago when he mentions that DEI conversations often happen solely from a kind of US and Canadian North American perspective. So really, we're all here in this room today because of Jeff. And Jeff, thank you for being here. Thank you for your collaboration.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I remember when we had this conversation, we're just exchanging ideas and I'm like, why don't we just do an event? And here we are today, this wonderful panelist and an awesome bunch of folks in this space. Thank you so much. It's awesome to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to move next to Kristy Singletary. Kristy uses she, her pronouns. She is passionate about cultivating a space where people can be their whole authentic selves and allow their superpowers to shine. Kristy has worked in a multitude of industries ranging from pharma, tech, government, and military. She currently works as a global diversity, equity, and inclusion lead at Pfizer, where she's responsible for education, awareness, and professional development programs. She spearheads learnings that focus on addressing systemic bias and implicit bias, and building cultural awareness and driving inclusion strategies across the employee life cycle. She currently lives between Brooklyn and Philadelphia, but her roots are from the Midwest. She's a fitness fanatic, boot camp instructor, health and wellness coach, and travel enthusiast. She is a major advocate for equal opportunity and spends her free time mentoring. Kristy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited for the conversation. And I think that you nailed it, Lisa, that a lot of conversations you do here are from the North American region. So it's an honor to be here to hear perspectives globally. I think this is an important topic to raise. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to move next to Evelyn Tay. Evelyn joined the Food Panda APAC team in May 2020. She brings with her more than 20 years of global PR, communications, and corporate affairs experience. In her current role, she is responsible for all aspects of corporate communications, PR, public policy, and regulatory affairs work across 12 countries. She also oversees Food Panda's sustainability program for Asia, leading initiatives and building a regional framework to move Food Panda's green agenda forward. In 2021, Evelyn was appointed to Delivery Hero's new Global Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board, set up to promote fair representation, inclusivity, and equitable structures at Delivery Hero. Prior to Food Panda, Evelyn spent over 20 years in tech communication fields with senior global and regional positions at multinationals, including Tesla, Uber, Microsoft, and SAP. Evelyn graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations. Welcome, Evelyn. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. And I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm really excited that this conversation is designed for a global perspective and global audience. And we were just chatting about it in the room before we entered. They were all from different parts of the world, and we're now based in different parts of the world. So I'm really looking forward to all the great things that we can discuss today. And thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And next, I'm going to move to Justin Boxall. Justin is the Inclusion and Diversity Lead for Mars UK. He is committed to ensuring that everyone can bring their full authentic selves to work to reach their full potential. He has worked for Mars for 25 years in a variety of sales, leadership, and HR roles. Justin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Lisa. Yeah, really looking forward to the discussion and looking forward to learning an awful lot from the rest of the panelists as well.
Me too. I'm going to jump right into it. So for our first question, I wanted to do just a little bit of context setting. So I think that DEI can be something that we all have a definition of, every company, every person, but we may not have the exact same definition. So I was wondering if we could start with, how do you personally think of the concept of DEI in a global context in your work? And Evelyn, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Oh, wow, that's a big question. When we think about DEI, or at least when I first started working on DEI responsibilities, one of the very interesting concepts that one of our DEI leads in Asia introduced to me was DEI is not just about sort of the conventional concepts that we often think about, ethnicity, religion, or cultural or gender. It's really diversity of thoughts as well, and opinions. And I find that so important and so interesting to me. And also I started to challenge and ask myself questions on, how I define that. And I think the more we can advocate for diversity that's all encompassing and inclusion, regardless of the physical attributes, and also the sort of cerebral, aspects, I think we'd all be in a much better place, and there would be fewer conflicts in this world, and not just in the world in general, but also in the workplace and also in our personal lives. So I don't know if that's too vague an answer, but to me, it's really the concept of diversity and inclusion in every aspect of how we live and work. So.
I love that. Does someone want to chime in next?
Yeah, sure. Just picking back on what Evelyn said, I always try and talk about where I'm from and what diversity means to us. So in Nigeria, diversity is governed by culture and tradition, because we're a really cultural country. If you talk about diversity, the first things that will come up is, what are your cultural identity? What are your beliefs? But that is just a one spectrum view of what DEI is. Like Evelyn said, it cuts across thoughts, opinions, and you can ask 10 people, what does diversity mean to you? And you get 10 different answers. And myself being on this journey, I've spoken to people across cross-sections, and I realized that diversity means a lot to a lot of people in a different way. But as a DEI advocate or someone that's intentional about learning about DEI, it's like you have to learn more, learn across what you are used to. For example, if I was saying I'm so into DEI and I'm using a Nigerian's perspective, obviously DEI is culture and tradition, I'm ignoring what every other person feels is DEI in terms of sexual identity, in terms of mental and physical capability, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of a whole lot. And the question always comes up, how do you balance so much in diversity? When you say balance, it sort of looks as if you're segregating it. In the US, based on what I've seen and the conversations I've had, diversity is usually focused on race and maybe neurodiversity. So in terms of ethnicity, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of some other things, people tend to focus more on some certain parts of it. Okay, we are doing DEI, and the first thing that comes up is, okay, it's Black History Month or it's Pride Month. But there's also physical and mental capability, neurodiversity. People that have mental illness, you also need to focus on that. So I'll say, just picking back on what she said, diversity cuts across a lot. Like I said, you ask 10 people in a room, what does diversity mean to you? And you get 10 different answers.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm excited to hear all of your answers too on this. Kristy, what about you? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think that it's so interesting. I echo the same of what Evelyn and Jeff have mentioned. It's not only just representation on what's on the exterior, but it's also kind of how you process your lived experiences. It really is diversity of your own, of individual truth, right? Because no one has that experience, the background, the education, your pathway. And there is no kind of similarities to that. No one else has really lived your life. So I think that when we look at diversity in the context of who are we inviting to the room, who are we really involving in conversations, is understanding that we have very individualistic perspectives that can add value to it. And also, what is that impact when we're not being inclusive of those kind of perspectives that can really add to the conversation? So when we think about diversity, it's really that own individual, what they stand for, what their culture is, what their representation, what matters to them. And that's how they want to pull forward. Especially when we ask people, what do you identify with? You will start getting multiple different answers. And that's when we start looking into that aspect of intersectionality, how we are not made of just one different thing. It's really layered and coupled onto all different assets and facets that really add to our vision and what we perceive the world as, our own personal truth.
That framing of asking what you identify as and hearing what is important to people feels like a really important thing to parse from that, especially in the workplace and on teams. And Justin, I want to hop over to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
The beauty of going last is that you can agree with what everybody else has said, which I absolutely identify with everything that's been said. For me, from a business perspective, it's trying to make sure that every single person in a business can be their full authentic self, and contribute to their absolute fullest, and be in an environment that enables and facilitates them to contribute to their absolute fullest. Because that's, and when it's done right, it's a triple win. It's a win for the employees, it's a win for the business, because that's where you get real disruptive innovation and businesses move forward, and it's a win for society. So that's what it is for me. It's that triple win where everybody benefits, and it's just the right thing to do, frankly. When I started working in the field, somebody gave me an analogy that kind of worked for me, which was diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being invited to help choose the music, and belonging is being invited to dance. So what I'd love to do is just invite everybody to dance. Really, everybody should. If everybody in the business that I work in feels like they belong and can be their full selves, then that's a great place to be.
I like that analogy. I don't think I had heard the full one before, so thank you for sharing that. As I was having chats with you all either by email or on Zoom before this event, a lot of you touched on the importance of a company's why in approaching DE&I work, or whatever acronym they choose to use. Rather than kind of jumping through the hoop and setting goals immediately, a lot of folks wanted to really focus on the importance of that why. So Justin, sorry to have you go first now when you just spoke the virtues of going last, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that foundational why. Why is that so critical before the goals and the metrics kind of come into play?
Yeah, it is totally important. Some of my background is around change leadership, and leading DE&I is leading change. It's leading really, really important fundamental change. And one of the core tenets around leading change is around helping all stakeholders to understand the context and the case for change, and that why, the benefits of change and the risks of not changing. And it's only really when that is fully understood then that those leaders, those stakeholders, can make that decision for themselves to jump on the bus and join it. And it's only then that you get the full sustainable benefit. If that's not done, and you just sort of have it's just another metric, any change that you do get, which will be minimal, just won't sustain. So you really need to invest that time up front in the why. Why do we need to change? Why do we need to change now? What are the benefits to change for the business, and what are the benefits to change for you as individuals, to help people make that decision to join us and be fully on the bus.
I'm gonna leave some space if anyone wants to chime in on the importance of a why.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about how we approach it as a company that, probably, very similar to Mars, because we operate in quite a lot of countries with very diverse cultures and needs. So for us, the why is almost like a natural sort of ground up movement that people feel passionate about. People feel like they wanted different voices to be heard. So both at the regional level. So for those of you who are not familiar, Food Panda is a food delivery and grocery delivery company that's our APAC headquarters based in Singapore. Our parent company is Delivery Hero, is based in Berlin, Germany. So we're in Asia, we operate across 11 countries, very diverse, very different markets. We cover almost all the Southeast Asian countries, plus Hong Kong, Taiwan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So by nature of our footprint, or food print, as we call it as a pun, we cover very, very different markets from north to south. So for us, it's also looking at what the country's needs and natural sort of progression of how they see DE&I topics and policies progressing or morphing over the years. For example, I'll say I recently visited one of our first office outside of Singapore when COVID rules started to relax, and I was in our Bangkok office, and there was a non-binary restroom. And I was so excited about it. And they designed a special logo for it. And I took a picture of it and I showed it to everyone. And I'm so proud, because these are not things that, I'm thinking of sitting in Singapore, right? It's the local team feeling like, hey, as we design a new office, let's do something special on this topic, or let's acknowledge that this is part of who we are and what's important to us. So I guess as a company that has, we have about 9,000 employees in APAC now, speaking, 40 over languages from 50 over nationalities. This is a very critical moment for us to acknowledge that, we have to win through diversity. And this is what's made us very successful in the past 10 years. But also, this will give us even more sort of sense of mission and purpose to go through the next 10 years, not just to our employees, but also to, our customers and the vendors and the partners that we work with all through the ecosystem. So yeah, to us, it's a very natural thing to do.
Sounds like that strong why is like what is empowering those. It's like the North Star of all of your local teams that gives them that ability to kind of go forth knowing that they will be supported. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Jeff or Kristy, do either of you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Kristy, you want to go? This Zoom, like, always try to talk.
I know.
But yeah. Using my present company right now, Syrian Blue. So Syrian Blue is like a Web3 company that focuses on building like a storefront for NFT artists. So what we are focused on is like, we're trying to present underrepresented NFT artists like in different countries, because in the NFT space, it's heavily dominated like by people in the US. So diversity is like part of even why the team came into play, because we are based in like Brazil, China, me in Nigeria, like in different places. And we want to reach out to all these underrepresented artists. So the business model was hire from the continents that have these artists, but they're not really giving attention. For example, in Nigeria, we have a lot of NFT artists. The same in Brazil, the same in the Caribbean. So Syrian Blue business model is, okay, how do we understand more about the culture in Brazil? How do we understand more about the culture in Nigeria? like I'm sure most of us have experienced it when we work with like a team member that is in a different country. Like in a way, we get to learn more about that person's culture, and we also get to learn more about that person's beliefs. So like that is our business model, and we tie it back to diversity. Like the head of the marketing department is very vocal about her LGBTQ rights, especially like in that space. So we always tie that back to like, how do we represent artists that are not really giving enough attention around different continents? So I think our strong right is just like representing people that have been marginalized in the NFT space. And we tie that back to like our business goals.
Yeah, I can echo a lot of Jeff's sentiment in terms of, the why is it's a necessity now. The world, if we can just look at data, the world's changing. We're becoming more and more diverse. We're seeing a lot more cross-cultural. We're becoming more globalized. I think that as we are looking at newer generations coming up, they are wanting to see themselves in products. They have a lot more tied to social value. Where is this company's ethics? So in terms of just business performance, you want to make sure that you're connecting to your audience, and to ensure that you're doing that, you want your workforce to also reflect the representation of who you're trying to reach to. So it's imperative to ensure that you draw those lines, and where you are thinking, how are you including all perspectives and identities within your products and services? So, and therefore also ensuring that the employees and your workforce feels the same. And if we're looking at just driving down from the top, and there, it's looking at when employees are engaged, when they're happy, when they feel like they belong, when they're appreciated, they want to do more. You think about when you are fully engaged and you feel valued, you feel that your input is being appreciated, you're going to want to do more. And that essentially leads to performing better, which ultimately goes to your bottom line. So it's ultimately, when you are treating people well, they're going to reciprocate that same energy, ensuring that you, the company, is doing well as in tandem. So I always think that, if you're caring for your workforce and you're playing, if you treat your workforce or your employees the same way as your customers, you will ultimately see that same kind of result as well.
I think that that's such a good point generationally too, that younger folks are, I think, increasingly aware and have access due to social media and the internet and everything. And they want to know what the products they're buying, what that company stands for. I think that's so true and so important. I wonder if I can stick with you, Kristy, because I know you mentioned identity earlier as something of asking folks how they identify and hearing what is important to them. So how do you think about identity in your work? How do you give team members that space to feel empowered to self-define at work?
Absolutely. I would say that, asking that individual, how do you identify, and how does that person and how does that individual respond to that question? So I think that we each have our own cultural identity. We each have our own experiences. And especially when we ask someone, who do you identify, the stories that you can find? We actually launched a conscious inclusion workshop of really trying to how to build inclusion across the employee life cycle. And one of the things that we first start off the conversation with is, what is your cultural identity? Where do you find yourself? Where are you from? And what are some of the things that you associate with? And hearing from these personal stories and just giving that space for people to say, this is important to me because how I grew up, and this is what I experienced, or this is based off of my identity as a Black woman, being part of this community, this is how the things that I experienced. So hearing people's own personal objections or how they want to proceed, that's how you really can start from there, not imposing anything from a base of a survey and thinking that anyone is monolithic. So I think it's identifying like what is their own personal idea and giving them that space. And those are where you start seeing that cross-cultural, and that's important of like self-identification at work when you have people going in and have the data and they're selecting the different fields, because that's when you're able to really extract the different layers of people and understanding that, not one group is answering something all into all. You can start finding where there may be some different gaps within that intersectional piece. So I always say that, identity is not monolithic. We each have multiple layers on top of each other that we need to take in consideration of how that shows up in certain environments and how that shows up and is received in certain spaces.
Like rather than putting folks into boxes, giving them a pen and being like, here, go to town, tell us what's important to you. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's really imposing more so the platinum rule instead of the golden rule. Instead of you treating people the way you want to be treated, treat them the way they want to be treated, and giving them the space for them to truly come forward and say who they really are. And so then you can start from there. But trying to impose your ideas based off of what you have perceived isn't going to get you to really move the needle. It's really starting from that own individual perspective.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I think for consideration, especially as we do rely on survey data a lot, and thinking about how we construct those types of things. Justin, I'd love to come to you next for your thoughts here.
Yeah, we do a lot of our work in I&D at Mars through employee resource groups, because you can set a strategy top down and you can set some metrics and stuff, but it's really sort of grassroots movements from passionate, energized people that can really move the needle and tell the authentic stories that resonate with people and genuinely make progress. And in a business the size of ours, it's really kind of easy to try and put a load of governance on that sort of stuff and kind of go, here's your structure of your employee resource group. This is what you're responsible and accountable for. This is what your KPIs are, and try and sort of make it like a business team. But that really doesn't work. Every bit as much as what Kristy was saying about individuals shining their own lights. It needs to happen with groups as well, and let them find their own way, let them be what they want to be, and because what we're relying on is their energy, their passion, on top of a day job to get stuff done. So and the only way that will happen to its optimum is letting them be what they're going to be. So providing as loose a framework as possible and as much freedom as possible. And as a result, we've got ERGs set up really differently. Some are very organized, some take formal minutes and have dashboards that monitor their progress. Others just get together, have a little chat, decide that something needs to be done and go do it. And every single one is equally successful within how that group needs to operate and how the individuals within that group need to operate. So that sort of freedom to be what they're going to be, focus on what they're going to focus on, and go where their passion and energy takes them is super important.
It feels like that diversity of ideas piece that Evelyn was talking about earlier, and the importance of not just like basing things on identity, but giving people that ability to have a diversity of ideas. And yeah. Evelyn, before this hour officially started, we were touching a little bit on the sustainability events that were happening at your company. And you mentioned that those were really driven by ERGs. So would you be open to talking about that a little bit? How ERGs have worked for you at Food Panda?
Yeah, sure. Also, I pre-apologize because the cleaning crew are vacuuming outside my
Can't hear
door,
it.
and
You're good.
I don't want to disrupt them from doing their jobs. But yeah, I mean, ERG is something we started to implement in the last year, and to my very pleasant surprise, they've been so passionate, they've been so active, and like Jeff said, it's really up to the individual teams to decide and design, you know, what they want to do and how they want to make it. Yeah, so it's worked out really well. For example, you know, sustainability was something that we've just been through last week for, we call it Sustainability Week, culminating up to Earth Day on Friday. So there was a lot of activities that they've designed, you know, went out and looked at, you know, what kind of activities would people want to be a part of, invited partners to come in. For example, we worked with, you know, Impossible Meats to do a tasting and to tell people, you know, what it means to switch to alternative plant-based food sources. And also they did plastic recycling workshops. So these are all things that, I mean, I would have not thought about or not thought of, like doing workshops and having it in the office so people can participate while they're rushing in between meetings. And already, you know, I just had a meeting today with our ERG for Pride Month that's coming up very soon. So these are all things that are very organic, very ground up. And it's really based on passion. And I think when you have passion, you know, more than OKRs and KPIs and anything in between, that's the best sort of motivation and ideas and sort of force that drives what people want. And again, I think we, as a company, we're very sort of country driven in terms of, you know, letting the countries decide what they want to do and what's best for them. You know, and a particular DE&I issue may mean more for one country over another. And it's, you know, we always believe it's not for us to sort of dictate or decide what's best for that market or for that country based on local needs and appropriateness. So I think that's worked out really well for us. And I think this is one of the things that impresses me most about being a part of this company. It makes me very, very proud. And I always tell the team, you know, I don't know what's better. And I don't know better than them, you know, sitting in Singapore versus what someone needs in a Hong Kong or a Pakistan. So yeah, so far our ERG groups have been amazing. And yeah, I'm super, super proud of them, and working with them has been a joy.
That's amazing. And our community has a lot of workplace community leaders, whether they're leading ERGs or communities of practice or other workplace communities. And that essentially at its heart is what an ERG is a community, right? So I wonder, Jeff, from a community expert perspective, if you are a person in a company who wants to drive some sort of DEI initiative and you feel like you could use some peer support, some community support, do you have any pointers on how folks could start building communities at work?
Yeah, I always say a community is formed by like these littlest things. Like before community was like conversations. I might always say, hey, I need help with something, and we create a group. That's literally a community. So I think it brings me to think about like inclusive communities in terms of having those communities for like support. Because like Kristy said, when there's diversity, there are different perspectives and different opinions. And I think Evelyn like sort of even piggyback by saying there are some ideas that she gets that from other people like in different countries that she might not have thought about it. And that's what diversity is. And in terms of the community aspect, I'll say, what is the goal of the community first? Because you also tied back to like why diversity matters. Because if your community goal is for support, who are the members that are going to be in this community? Is it going to be an internal community? Is it going to be an external community? Like what are the initiatives that are going to be done in the community? I think by strongly defining what the goal of the community is, you're able to like have a roadmap of what you want to achieve. And I think it also brings the idea of like, this is off topic here, but this also brings the idea of like allyship versus like heroism or saviorship. Like I've noticed in DI, a lot of people want to be allies, but they end up having like a savior complexity. like what Kristy mentioned, like you can't put a group of people who are diverse in like a matrix or a tick box, like saying, okay, these are like 70% of people who are filled as surveys and they're diverse. That just shows I can literally fill a survey in like 5 seconds and I literally did not read through. But when you are intentional about it, you make that intentional connection. I think that's where true diversity is. Like most people fall into that pit box of you want to be an ally, but you end up having a savior mentality. And the danger of that is that you impose your beliefs on people. And it sort of happens in the community space. Like a lot of community builders are trying to build inclusive communities. But the funny part is they are trying to build inclusive communities to what they think is inclusive, not what their community members think is inclusive. So when you are building a community, you are based in the US, yeah, you build a community for US folks because you think that, okay, this is right for this kind of community. But if you don't have that inclusive mindset, you might end up doing a lot of things. For example, time zones, like community managers will just put, okay, EST. I mean, hey, I'm in Nigeria, like EST for me, like 12 EST can be 1 a.m. And obviously I won't be able to attend your events. Even inclusive language, like there are some communities I've seen that I literally don't know what is going on. And I'm like, yeah, like because of the language used. So I would say, like, picking back to what I said, the goal of your community, like what you want to achieve with the community, like trying to avoid that bias towards building a community. Because if you build a community for what you think is right, trust me, 100% community members will know. Like being in Nigeria, I've joined a lot of communities that say they are diverse and like they have that ideology of like, we're actually working towards diversity. We are working towards diversity for what you think is diversity in the US. And I'm based in Nigeria. Diversity means a whole lot. I think like that's why this conversation is like, is a global perspective. So I would say the importance of community is like the goal, what you want to achieve, and the members that are going to be in that community, how you're going to engage them for support.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think it's when we think of DEI, our minds can jump to these like big initiatives. And like you were saying, like sometimes the smaller, or it's not small, but like the things that get missed are things like time zones or inclusive language or things like that. And where that's really some of the most important work that you can do to have folks feel welcome in the virtual or in-person room. Thank you so much for that, Jeff.
Yeah, definitely.
And I wonder if you could speak to something specific that you've seen work really well towards creating equitable and inclusive global organizational cultures. If there's any example that you'd like to touch on.
I would say senior leadership sponsorship in 3 words has been absolutely key. In a business like ours, a business of the scale of ours, having our leaders, and when I say sponsorship, I mean proper sponsorship, not like showbiz sponsorship where you say you're a sponsor, but you know, just because it looks good on the CV or something to say at a dinner party. Actually getting in there, get properly involved in stuck in and help drive it. Talk about it all the time, authentically. Nothing gives more confidence than a senior leader putting up their hands and saying, you know what, I got that wrong, and I did it wrong, and I learned from it, and I'm a better person because of it. And if we can get when we get our senior leaders properly involved, sponsoring it, sharing their own stories, communicating, building coalitions to break down all the roadblocks that corporate glue caused to be in our way. That's when we can really get some momentum, because their positions are aspirational. If they're role modeling this stuff, then that looks great. As an example of that, a couple of years ago, somebody in our ERG for employees with disabilities spotted that there was a new build of a research and development facility going on. The main labs were on the 2nd floor, and there was no lift. So they were basically saying, yeah, people with accessibility difficulties, we don't want you working in R&D in this building. So this lady spotted it and shouted. and because she knew a sponsor that was a global president, not only was that global president able to facilitate fixing that building, they were also able to have the right conversations to fix every building now and in the future. So having the senior leaders that understand it, are properly involved, and appreciate what's needed, that can break down an awful lot of barriers, and has been a real success.
I can take a little bit of that and extend on that in terms of sponsorship and also just putting policies behind that belief. I'm going to have to read a little bit from my notes because my memory is not so great. But recently we've just extended our benefits in many different ways. So for example, we've increased the number of paternity and maternity leave. And this is, I'm talking about the regional employees and employees based in Singapore as an example. We even built in fertility treatment leave. So for couples who are looking to go through that. And in fact, one of the things that we also openly talk about is, should unfortunately some families go through, miscarriages, they also get additional leave to recover from that, emotionally and also physically. We've also recently extended same gender medical benefits coverage, which I'm super happy and proud of. So these are just some of the examples that we've really put into practice, and that requires approvals at all levels, right? All the way to, to top leadership, from top leadership to have that endorsement and to have that support that our people team is able to extend to all our employees based in Singapore, our APAC employees based here as well. So yeah, hopefully that encourages more companies to come out and do the same and walk the talk together.
I love that, Evelyn, especially having the policies and the benefits to back behind it. It's starting from the top, it's having the sponsorship and actually creating actionable steps in order for people to feel that way. I know that, we talk about the change in the workforce right now is going through a great resignation. People are quitting or they're transitioning to another company, but really looking at it as an opportunity for the great reimagination. How are you creating the structures and policies in place for employees to want to stay? So what are we doing to really meet their needs and understanding their own personal perspectives? Knowing that, this is a time to listen to the working mother who has, or the working parent, I should say, who has multiple responsibilities, knowing that statistically there has been an impact on certain groups within this time. We all had to undergo a large shift within just the current workforce, and we're getting massive downloads of information. I know one of the things that at Pfizer, and knowing that is really important now more than ever to care for well-being. So there's simple things that we do of enforcing focus weeks. So we try to institute where there will be no meetings, where you can really concentrate on your work, catch up to some of those outstanding tasks that you're unable to get to because there's just a flood of information going in, or making sure to leverage your leave, or to try to have these conversations. And where it starts, I know someone said it earlier, is that before really starting these different movements and initiatives is having the conversations, creating those safe spaces where people can come forward and say, this is really a problem for me, or this is something how I'm reacting to what's going on in the world. What can we do? And really taking an opportunity to empathize and take action from those conversations. So we also host a series of safe space conversations where we just have a conversation about what's going on. How can we check in? How can we better support the employees? And then from there, giving the autonomy, also and vulnerable space by having leadership coming in to share their stories, gives a little bit of an openness for people to say, this is what's going on. And then from there, we've noticed a lot of momentum where it's like, we need to do something about this, because if people have the much courage, if we given them the courage to come forward and say it, then we should also respond by having enough courage to do something about it.
I love the phrase, the great reimagination, so much. And yeah, everything I'm hearing from what you all are saying, it just feels so human to ask, to ask people what's going on with you, what do you need, and give them the space to answer, really listen and do something about it. It just feels like humanizing the workplace kind of all around for everyone, and that's so important. Jeff, I want to give you space to answer as well if you have anything that has worked really well that you've seen.
Yeah, I think there's a community, like, because I'm pivoting towards like Web3. I think Web3 Buddies is a community of queer people of color, like people that have been marginalized basically in the NFT space. So what they do is they get a group of people like that into like a community. And aside from that, like they also provide resources. I think what Kristy said in terms of like the great reimagination, and people realize that they deserve more in a workplace. Like work-life balance is something that is very key. So it's like, if you feel like you're not treated fairly, you can literally resign from it. So I think by having communities or spaces where people can be their like self and also like contribute to ideas in a safe way. So in a safe way is what people are like pivoting towards too. And it spans more than community. It spans even in conversations with like your friends or conversations with like members, like especially in like the US, for example, like during the George Floyd incident, there was a little of like, so much tension and there was a spike that people were starting to realize that this issue has been something people have been talking about for like ages, like police brutality towards like people of color, especially in like Black community. So there was a spike. So during that time, a lot of brands and a lot of companies came up with the whole slogan of Black Lives Matter. And some people actually resigned from their company because they felt like it was just like they were not genuine with it. So I think in terms of like true genuinity also counts in terms of like creating that diversity in your community. And I've used Web3 Buddies, like it's literally providing a platform for people that have been marginalized to express themselves freely in any way they can. And it's their own safe space, because the kind of community, although there's a bit of a gate, but you can enter if you're like, you feel you want to like express yourself. And I think we are seeing more of that. Like a lot of communities are coming up, like Black in community, Web3, because they are realizing that you have to like create a safe space for yourself as a person that has been marginalized. And we are seeing more of that like in the community industry and even at like in work as well.
Yeah, that seems like where those ERGs and other workplace communities can be a huge support as well. I have one question from chat: how to start the talk without being invasive within a company. And what she said about the term invasive was just how to not make people feel bad instead of being open to build a new humanized workspace. That one?
I can take a stab at it.
Yeah.
I actually think that Justin started talking about it earlier, is about having that senior leadership sharing their stories, modeling the behavior of vulnerability, that is okay to be who you are, to own your story, to own your truth. And there aren't going to be any punitive actions. Typically when people can set the stage by sharing their own personal perspectives. And when leaders are doing it, then it really helps kind of invite the conversation for others to do the same. And knowing that it's okay if you don't want it, also leaving the space too, that you are allowed to just come and listen, or you're allowed to come and share. So giving the opportunity for the individual to make the decision on their own personal feelings rather than forcing anything helps really set the stage of, let's keep this as a more inclusive and open and vulnerable conversation.
I also think besides having leaders set that example or take that first step, it could also be an employee, taking that first step and then having a strong sort of support system, be it from leadership or people team or colleagues around them, rallying around the topic and giving this individual or this colleague the voice. For example, in Thailand, we have an amazing transgender champion who speaks up very openly about the topic, shares her experiences. And every time she posts something or shares something or does an interview, all of us go and say, we love that story, and you know, we high five her and we share it widely. And from what you know, what she's told me, or what I know, you know, she's truly encouraged by that. And that also creates that safe space for other people to say, well, you know, I can share my story too. So I think it comes in different forms at different levels, but yeah, we need that you know, one person to take that first step, and then everyone kind of like giving them that support system behind that is also quite important.
Thank you for your question. And I'm really struck by the way that you all just celebrated the folks who share. I think even when leaders share, I'm sure that's a vulnerable thing to do. And it's probably nice to have some encouragement and acknowledgement of that, and create more space for other folks to share, but also just really acknowledge the labor that folks are doing when they are putting their story out there. I love that. I'm going to come over to Tiffany. You have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, everyone. First, greetings from the great state of Ohio. Thank you for hosting this. This is awesome. I want to touch on two things that are questions. One that I really like what Jeff said is you have to be intentional. And then Justin kind of came behind and said senior leadership sponsorship is important to drive this. What are your recommendations, if any, on how to get senior leadership on board when there has been such a history of a culture that shies away from I see no evil, hear no evil type of mentality? What are your recommendations to try to get those individuals on board? Because that's that's my MO right now. Thank you.
So I can talk about what worked for my senior leaders that I had to engage. And that was talking about that triple win. So not just talking about the societal impact, and not just talking about the positive impact on individuals, but also talking about the positive impact on the bottom line of the business, and actually being able to balance all of those three and demonstrably. There's some great studies out there. There's a McKinsey one that shows that companies in the top 25% for diverse leadership outperform those in the bottom 25% of diversity for leadership by 65 to 100% in terms of return on equity. So when you can bring sort of performance-related facts to the table like that, along with the positive societal impact, along with the positive impact on employees, it becomes quite difficult to say no to, and that's what won my sort of presidents and senior leaders group over, was that sort of balance between the three.
I see a follow-up question in chat from Ella to you, Justin. What if, by extension of Tiffany's question, leadership doesn't recognize that this is a need, and therefore don't hold the space for advocating the value of it?
Gosh, that's a tough one, and I think I've been fortunate in that my leadership sees the need. I think that would be a tough place. I think if my leadership didn't see the need for this, the first thing they'd have is my resignation, probably. I couldn't work in a place where that's the case. I don't know if the rest of the panel have had any examples of this. I'm fortunate in that I haven't.
It's funny because you mentioned that, because I actually did that in terms of like resigning. So I worked for a company that was creating products for African American women in the US. So I noticed there were some things they did in terms of like the marketing space. And I'm like, even as a person in Nigeria, I knew that it wasn't wrong. I think it brings what Justin said in terms of like, if C-level and leadership doesn't see the value, or they don't like believe in it, you're probably hitting a brick wall. So I actually spoke about it, but I think the mistake I made then was I didn't provide like key metrics and key like a presentation on this is why this is wrong, and this is like the importance of diversity. I think Shona Sommer, someone I look up to in DEI space, she has like a program for Black professionals in the US and in HubSpot. So in one of our sessions, she literally did a presentation and she showed when you have like a subgroup for like diverse people, or you have a subgroup for people of color, this is what you are going to get in your community, or you're going to get in your company. Like there's going to be like increased buy-in. People are going to like comment more on this. Like she literally showed why diversity was important. And I think that's key, especially to leadership, because they want to see what are they getting back, like what is the value. So, which is very crazy because it's like, I'm trying to prove that diversity is important. I don't really have to, because why? But in terms of leadership or in terms of business, you have to tie it back to like the business goal. So yeah, as soon as I told that to the Chinese, the company I worked for, and they were like, they didn't see value. The next day I resigned because I knew that this was wrong and this was something that would be offensive. And it was at the end of the day. But if someone of color that is telling you that this is wrong, I don't think you should do this, and you go ahead to do this, obviously there will be repercussions and there will be backlash. So picking back on what Justin said, like if your company is not toxic and if they want to see like the value of diversity, I think having like a slide or a deck showing like this is diversity and this is what it adds to the company in terms of performance, in terms of like buying, in terms of sale, will actually help you state your points in like presenting it to like C-level.
Kristy or Evelyn, anything that you'd want to add?
Yes, I know we're short on time, but thanks, Lisa. I actually was typing in the chat, but really, I think Jeff nailed it. Learning the language of leadership. They want to see more so what is the business proposition? What is it that is actually going to be of value to that bottom line? And there are plenty of studies conducted by McKinsey, Deloitte, a lot of things that just really tie of how the impact of exclusion when you're not being inclusive. It really helps because especially when you are going to outmarket yourself by not tailoring to the community of where we're going in the world. So really identifying what is that connection piece of how you can really showcase how diversity, not only inclusion, is going to put us in a better marketing position to where we're going to essentially drive to the bottom line. And also it's really trying to find what that cohort, and I know that the work is hard, and I do emphasize and admire the fact that you are pushing this work with being in such a tough situation. And that's when really helping building that board of directors and that arms next to you who can really help encourage as you are pushing this work, that somebody who is at your peers who can be positive and motivating so you can continue to do it on. Because I know that it gets hard, especially when you're beating down the same avenue of saying like this is what you need to do, but then unfortunately it falls on deaf ears. So just knowing that, really trying to get some sponsor or someone who can help advocate for the work that you're doing to really be encouraging during this time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your question, Tiffany, too. Thanks for all the folks who asked questions. I know we're right at 1 minute over time. Actually, I'm going to pop our community link in the chat one more time if you want to check it out. Huge, massive thanks to all of our wonderful speakers today. I think this conversation could probably be hours long. I hope it is the first of many that we have. Thank you all for being here and sharing your expertise with us.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
very much. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.